Preciados amigos y amigas, qué alegría que estemos todos juntos aquí en la Iglesia de Todos los Santos. Dear friends, what a joy it is that we are all here together at All Saints Church. Welcome to Sunday Morning Live. Mi nombre es Mike Kinman. My name is Mike Kinman, soy Rector. I am the Rector. Mi pronombre él. My pronouns are he, him. It is wonderful to have you here at All Saints Church this morning. We're coming to you from a bunch of different places. I'm in Tucson right now, hanging out with my dad. And other folks are actually in the forum. We're all over the country. So we're coming to you live from lots of different places. At our Sunday food table this morning at All Saints Church, we gave out 47 boxes of food from Hope Kitchen and 75 disposable masks. Big thank you to Erica Tamblin and everyone who was out at All Saints Church this morning doing that. Also, when this pandemic started, All Saints began to support some of the local organizations with which we have strong ties, who are doing amazing work in this community as our partners in love, because we wanted to ensure their good work continued during these challenging times. One of our biggest partners for a long time has been Learning Works Charter School, and we've come together as a community to fill their pantry that serves students and families in need, as well as provide lunch for staff and students who drop into the school. Well, we need your help to ensure that a team of faithful All Saints volunteers can continue to provide lunch at Learning Works 3 days a week through the end of the calendar year. This needs actually become greater because one of the Homeboy locations has temporarily shut down and their staff are using Learning Works site, and we need to feed them as well. So we need to raise about $1,500 to get us through the rest of the school year. So just asking you to visit the All Saints website, click on the donate link, and then on one-time gift. And actually the link to the donate link should be coming in the chat soon. Then you can contribute any amount to this effort. No gift is too small, no gift's too large either. Type Learning Works under the special gift notes. You can help nourish the bodies and minds of some of those vulnerable in our community through your generosity. And so much thanks to Elizabeth Lashley Haynes. Liz, you are amazing, and you're doing incredible work coordinating this ministry. Before we get to our forum, you pray with me. God dwells in you.
Also
Let us pray. Holy and loving God, giver of all good gifts, we thank you this morning for the gift of life, for the gift of joy, and for the great gift you give us when you give us to each other in the church. Set our hearts on fire for your love and for your justice. Give us a vision of the new creation that you bring into being through us, and give us the gift of your wisdom that she may guide us to achieving it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so I'm excited about this forum. So I'm sure you all know here at All Saints Church, we always put our faith into action, and that means our core values of radical inclusion, courageous justice, joyful spirituality, and ethical stewardship. These are not just words on a page that get stuck on a shelf somewhere. These are our marching orders. We set a goal this year to be 100% voting congregation. And although we don't have any statistics to confirm this, it is really, really hard for me to believe that anyone eligible to vote at All Saints Church didn't cast a ballot. So first of all, shout out to Juliana Serrano and everyone who made the 100% voting congregation happen. Now, I know right now we probably all have map brain from looking at that electoral map for days on end. And though the presidential race is decided, votes are still being counted and the work ahead of us is still taking shape. So this morning, we're joined by three wonderful friends to help us just begin to sort through what has happened and, to quote Jed Bartlett, what's next. First, we have the Reverend Kim Jackson. Kim is an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of Atlanta. She serves as the vicar of the Church of the Common Ground, a church without walls for people living on the streets of Atlanta. This week, she became the senator-elect for the Georgia State Senate District 41, garnering 80% of the vote. And will become the first out LGBTQ state senator in Georgia history. Kim, it is wonderful to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
You bet. We also have Alan Yarborough. Alan is the church relations officer with the Episcopal Church Office of Government Relations and is primarily responsible for the maintenance and growth of the Episcopal Public Policy Network and policy advocacy and civic engagement resources. He previously lived and worked in Haiti with the Young Adult Service Corps in the Episcopal Church and is currently getting his master's in conflict analysis and resolution from the Carter School at George Mason University. Alan was also with our LGBTQ ministry a few days ago. It is great to have you back. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You bet. And finally, Lisa Gasperoni is the owner of LG Campaigns, a firm that provides strategic advice and general political consulting services. A campaign professional who has more than 30 years political experience, Gasperoni has been involved with more than 250 campaigns, ranging from congressional to state senate, assembly, mayoral, supervisorial, and city council, as well as local and statewide ballot measures, independent expenditure campaigns. She served as the top political strategist for State Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, and currently serves as political advisor to another one of our partner in love, Planned Parenthood, this one, the affiliates in Sacramento. And a reminder that you all can put your, welcome Lisa, I'm sorry, introduce you. Say, welcome,
thank
Lisa.
you for having me.
You bet. A reminder that all of you can put your questions in the Q&A feature, and we will get to those as the morning goes on. Okay, well, we've introduced everybody. Let's play our game. And I want to start with you, Kim. First, just congratulations on your victory. I did my own happy dance when you won the primary, knowing that was the big thing for you. But congratulations on your victory this week. Just want to have you talk to us a little bit about it. What have you learned? What are you learning in this campaign, both about what's facing our nation, and also what does it mean to live out your faith in the public sphere?
Yeah, well, thank you again so much for having me, Mike, and thanks for all of your support from all the way across the continent. It's been wonderful to receive support literally across the country. In fact, this has been a historic race, one we didn't set out to make history. I set out to run for office, kind of naively assuming that somebody else had already done this before. And so it was a happy discovery, I guess, to see where we are. I think a few things that I've learned throughout the course of this race is first and foremost, at least here in Georgia, in my district, people are hungry for people of faith to stand up and to offer themselves as public servants. And then specifically, they were hungry for progressive people of faith. And I can't tell you, before COVID hit, when we were being able to go door to door and having meet and greets over and over again, I had people who I think had been ashamed to say out loud with their friend groups that they were Christian, come up to me and say in person, "I'm so grateful that you are a Christian who is pro-choice, who is standing up and fighting for these values that really matter. And it makes me think that maybe I can come back to church again." And that has been a happy accident in the midst of all of this, right? And I think as I've looked at this campaign, both my own campaign and campaigns that have happened in Georgia and across this nation, one thing that seems clear to me is that people are yearning for people who are authentic, who offer their true and full selves. At this point, this is my 26th interview that I've done in the last 4 days. And and over again, people keep just saying to me, we're surprised that there was a Black person, a Black woman in the South who ran out, like as an out queer woman. We are surprised by that, and we are grateful for that. And I think that that's what the people in my district appreciated, and people across the country just appreciate that I was real with who I am. And I think people appreciate authentic candidates who care, who have compassion, and who want to be honest about who they are and what they stand for.
How do you you said people were surprised that you were running. This has been characterized, and certainly we've seen it on a national stage, as an incredibly negative campaign cycle. Were there pieces of that you experienced as well, and how did you deal with that, if there were?
Actually, I feel incredibly blessed. I ran a very competitive primary. There were 4 people in that race, and even then, people were incredibly respectful. At least the candidates that I was running against, and that was really helpful for me. I learned early on to stop reading the comments. That helped.
Yep.
Immensely. And so, I can't say I didn't have a negative campaigning experience, and for that, I'm incredibly grateful.
Yeah, I'm glad. That actually is one of the more hopeful things that I've heard. We've heard, especially this week, a lot of praise rightfully directed towards Stacey Abrams and the work that she has done in Georgia. And we also know it's a lot of people, organizers like Tamika Atkins at Pro Georgia, Helen Butler, Deborah Scott with Georgia Stand Up. There's many, many others. It was the work of a lot of people. As someone who was a part of that movement, Can you talk about the work of Black women and non-binary activists in Georgia that looks like it is flipping that state? How, talk about the effectiveness of that. How much of this is new and how much has been there all along?
Right. So this has been a long strategic journey that, I mean, Stacey Abrams really dreamed this dream 10 years ago, when she first started going around the state and basically counting the numbers and saying we have numbers on our side if we just get people registered to vote. So this is not something that we cooked up 2 years ago. This has been a long time coming. But yes, Mike, absolutely. This has been largely the work of Black women and Black queer folks, and I'm really proud to be a part of that and grateful for that work. I think one of the big differences in how strategy has worked in Georgia with the leadership of Black women is that even if our Black organizers have not necessarily been people of faith, they have taken people of faith very seriously. And so they have intentionally, and we have intentionally organized Black churches and Black church folks, both inside of urban areas and outside of urban areas. So if you look at the work of, say, the New Georgia Project, I mean, they went to, rural counties all across Georgia, to the AME churches, to the Black churches, gathered and said, let's do some work here. Let's equip you to get counted for the census, because that's been a part of this work, right? And then to also make sure that you vote and that you know why voting matters, right? And so taking people of faith, taking Black people's faith seriously, has really been incredibly important. Not just Christians, but also there's been significant work in the Muslim community, because there is a significant Black Muslim community, and a Muslim community of color in general that is kind of spread out throughout Georgia. And again, you had Black women who stood up and said, we will take these people seriously. We will meet them where they are, which is often in their places of worship.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of just another thing I was so happy about, which is Cori Bush. And maybe when we were in Ferguson together, maybe you met Cori Bush. Cori Bush she was a Ferguson activist, a nurse, and also Cori's an ordained pastor.
Ordained, yeah.
And Cori was someone who took the energy of that movement that ignited in Ferguson, and working with people like Kayla Reed and others, turned it into a successful campaign for the U.S. House of Representatives. And I'm hoping that stories like that will be more and more common. And what I'm also hoping is that Stacey and others have maybe written a playbook that other places can use, that primarily progressives have maybe written off.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm looking forward to seeing that playbook reenacted, particularly across the South. I think that Georgia is just the beginning of what we're going to see happen across the South.
Amen. Thank you. I'm going to jump over to Alan for a second. Alan, Episcopal Public Policy Network and the Office of Government Relations have been around for a long time, but I'm always surprised how many people have not heard of them. Can you just talk a little bit about what EPPN is, the Office of Government Relations, and how the Episcopal Church is present in Washington?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something common that I see across the church, is that people are just not familiar with our office and how to engage with it. So I appreciate the opportunity to share about it and invite people at All Saints to join in our work, because we are more effective and stronger in our work when we're working together. And so the Office of Government Relations, as you mentioned, it's been around a while, since the late 70s is when it was established, specifically to represent the policy positions of the Episcopal Church to the U.S. federal government. And so that those policies, though, they've come from General Convention and Executive Council, so the governing bodies of the church. They're not something that we're just sort of creating on our own, but we're representing what the democratically elected body of the church has said on dozens and dozens of issues, even going back before the office was created. And so there's sort of two faces to this work. One is our staff who are present in DC, who are meeting with members of Congress, they're meeting with their staffs, they're meeting with administration, government agencies, focusing on policy and legislative matters that the church has spoken out on. And then the other sort of side to that is our church engagement piece, which is what I've been primarily leading in my 4 years here with the office, and that we organize through the Episcopal Public Policy Network. So both of those are part of the church-wide staff.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Wonderful. So as you've looked at what has been happening this past week, and as you're looking towards the future, what issues on the national level is the church looking to focus on in the next year or two, and how can a congregation like All Saints be a part of it?
Sure. So in terms of the sort of our priority issues, we try to shy away from using that word, but we look at where can we be more effective uniquely as the Episcopal Church, and thinking about this work as a relationship. So what value do we bring to the conversation? Using that, we look at international issues and foreign policy, drawing from our Anglican communion relationships. Creation care and the environment is a significant piece of this as well. We've also been leaders in the immigration space in a number of ways, especially in refugee resettlement, drawing from the experience of Episcopal migration ministries. And then sort of things that just don't get in the news, which are primarily anti-poverty initiatives that just kind of go under the radar, but are always present and in different forms. Most, I think, urgently will be COVID relief and economic relief in the moment, but even long-term, looking at how do we address those underlying problems, both within the US and outside of it. Folks can get involved by joining the Episcopal Public Policy Network. We have an email list where we send calls to action about once a week, or we're on social media at the EPPN, and we have a ton of resources that we share through the EPPN on election engagement. I appreciate Kim you bringing up the census. We were an official census partner this year, and we'll continue to track that work into 2021 with redistricting and apportionment. There are civil discourse resources that we have. I know I did a training out in Los Angeles earlier this year on civil discourse, trying to help people improve the way that they can talk to each other and listen to each other over political difference, to help us address some of these challenging problems. So there are a lot of different ways to get involved, and as I mentioned, the more folks who are on board, the more effective we can be in this work.
Not to ask you to break out a crystal ball, but maybe I'll ask out a crystal ball, which is, for the last 8 to 12 years, and particularly in the last 4 years, it has been difficult, if not impossible, to get a progressive agenda through Congress. And there has been an unwillingness to work together on issues. And with Trump being held to only one term, do you have any hope for that changing? I mean, obviously a lot will depend on the outcome of the runoff elections for the Senate in Georgia. But do you have any hope, or how much hope do you have over the next, let's just say 2 years until the midterm elections, of being able to push any legislation through, or is it going to be more damage control?
It's a challenging environment, I think, particularly with how the Senate has been, but the House too at times, in terms of moving forward legislation. The House has been incredibly active, and we've seen a lot of bills that we've supported move through there, but then they haven't received a vote in the Senate. It remains to be seen if that will change, I think, in the new Congress coming up. I'm optimistic that it will. I think there are opportunities for folks to reach across the aisle, and there's some issues, immigration being an example, that have actually had bipartisan support in the past. It's not something that's unfamiliar to the Republicans, and for Democrats working together with the Republicans on that. Of course, the DREAM Act is kind of one of the bigger pieces that has been stuck, but it still has received bipartisan support. So I'm optimistic with that. I don't think, moving out of a damage control area will be critical for a number of issues. Perhaps the most immediate one will be the refugee resettlement program, and that's mostly because that lies, other than funding, which Congress has consistently expressed support for, the decisions for that program lie within the presidential administration. And so that will be up to the Biden administration to determine the ceiling for refugee resettlement, and hopefully that program has just barely held on across the 9 agencies that resettle refugees. And so we're really optimistic on that front too, that can, we'll not only move from damage control, but into a space of actually productive growth. And hopefully maintain, through the work that we've done in coalition with other partners, maintain the relationships in Congress on both sides of the aisle who have been supportive of that work.
I'll come back to you in a minute. I want to jump over to Lisa. Lisa, thanks for being here. You kind of have the 35,000 foot level on the state of California view. Can you give us a rundown of what happened on the state level with ballot initiatives? What you think the most significant developments are, what's hopeful, what's disappointing? Particularly interested in Proposition 15, which is one of the first significant attempts to reverse some of the parts of Proposition 13, which failed. Looks like it's going down. It's 52 to 48 right now. Can you sort of give your view of, what kind of week has it been?
Sure. First of all, thanks everyone for voting.
Yeah.
I really love voter participation. It was an interesting night. I mean, this question's been raised. California voted for Joe Biden at a rate of 65%, which is higher than we voted for any other president, I think, in history. And yet some ballot measures that are considered progressive didn't quite make it. And so I think there is a big difference between voting for a candidate and voting for an issue. I have a lot of faith in the voters. I do think they're thoughtful. I think they don't want to make mistakes. And when you put issues before them, it's complicated. All these issues are very complicated. Even changing Prop 13, it's complicated. It hasn't been done before. That's been in place since 1978. And it actually won with 62% of the vote, because I went and looked it up. I couldn't remember that. So I think the schools and communities first did a really great job of framing this as, we need to get corporations to pay their fair share to fund our schools and essential services. And then on the other side, we did see more traditional, some messaging that we would expect, like we can't afford to raise taxes, businesses are suffering enough right now during the pandemic. But when we saw the president of the NAACP doing ads saying, this is going to particularly hurt minority-owned businesses, I think that was hard for a lot of people who are progressive to understand, what are we doing here? And kind of the natural default when you don't know what to do is you just say, let's just keep things the way they are, because at least I can understand what that is. And I think the other notable measure probably was Proposition 16, the affirmative action measure.
Right.
I think we were all surprised really about those numbers, but when I went back,
huge. Yeah.
I thought about it and I looked at it. I mean, affirmative action really hasn't been discussed in California for many, many years, not really. And it did get put on the ballot very late through the legislature. And I just don't think we had enough time to educate people about it. I mean, I saw polling that said half of all Latinos were going to vote no, right? And that doesn't seem right. So I just think with something like that, we need to give ourselves time. We need to talk to one another. We need to educate people about it. We need to reach across to the business community. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily opposed to it. And, maybe there's even a different way to frame it rather than let's just, put affirmative action back in. I looked at this for SEIU a couple of years ago and we did some polling and it was not popular. I mean, it wasn't going to go anywhere. And we started looking at what if we frame it instead as like a socioeconomic frame. People should be given opportunity. And that covers largely a lot of communities of color, obviously, it will be part of that. So, we need to keep talking about it, I think, and keep pushing for change in that area.
As I look at some of the other progressive measures that failed, fortunately, in my opinion, Measure 17 passed, which was restoring the right to vote for people released from prison. Like 17-year-olds voting in primary and special elections if they turn 18 by the next general election. It failed 56 to 45. Measure 21, allowing local governments to establish rent control on properties over 15 years old, that failed 60 to 40. And then, the Uber and Lyft has gotten a lot of press. They're now exempt from providing benefits to drivers, and that passed basically like almost 60 to 40. Is the path forward similar to affirmative action? Do we just keep trying and educate more or do something else? Or what do we need to do if we care about these issues?
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention, I thought the bail reform one, I was surprised about that, but it was complicated because it was a referendum. So you were actually supposed to vote yes. It seemed it was a contradiction. I do think some people got confused about that, honestly. With regard to Prop 22, that's the Uber one, they spent $200 million.
Yes.
Unprecedented. And the other side had 20 million, how do you overcome that? It was everywhere. I mean, it was wherever you turn, there was advertising about that. I think what's notable though, what we saw with both of those 22 and 25 is the legislature passed a law that affected a specific industry, and the industries decided they weren't going to let that stand and that they were going to go straight to the voters. And they were successful, right, in both instances. And so I think we should be prepared that we may see that going forward. And perhaps when we do things through the legislative process, I mean, we do have super majorities in the legislature, which is great, but maybe we need to think about crafting measures that bring everybody to the table. We don't want to keep being in this position, right? We should maybe be negotiating more in the legislature to get what we want done at the end of the day.
So we're, as you know, All Saints, we're a church with values of radical inclusion, courageous justice, joyful spirituality, and ethical stewardship. And we work with LA Voice, which connects us with congregations all over the region. And we work on issues that LA Voice is focusing on with the whole body of faithful folks. As you look at going forward into 2021 and beyond, what's on the horizon? What are the state issues that are in front of us that faith communities should be considering focusing on?
Well, obviously, I think we need to continue our work to fight systemic racism and to promote equity for everybody. And I think the key here is continue our work, right? I mean, sometimes in politics, a lot of times it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, but it's still forward. Progress is slow. I was thinking this morning about gay marriage. I mean, I've been around when you couldn't get that bill through the state legislature, which, I know seems ridiculous today. And then it was just in 2008 when Proposition 8 passed, where California voters said we're going to ban the right for same-sex couples to marry in California. The year we elected Barack Obama president, and it was only 12 years ago.
Right.
But look how far we've come in 12 years because people kept at it. We kept working on it. We kept talking about it. And I really think that the key is to not be discouraged. I mean, a loss is a loss, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward and keep working and keep pushing and reaching across and building coalitions that are very broad-based.
Yeah. So we're starting to get some questions in, which is great. And actually a couple of them, people have weighed in on the bail reform measure. And it was opposed by the ACLU, Reform LA Jails, and other progressive groups trying to reform the bail system. We're saying no on 25. I know Black Lives Matter Los Angeles said vote no on 25 because according to them, it was creating a situation worse than current bail. It sounds like we need to have some real education and conversation in this state about what true bail reform looks like, and get progressive groups to agree.
Yeah, agreed. And, for many voters, they don't have any direct experience with the bail system. I mean, they vaguely understand how it works, but personally, they don't have experience with it and don't understand. And that's why I think the education is so important. And like I said, it was confusing and people didn't know what to do. And before we're going to change the whole system, I want to understand it and feel comfortable. And so I think ongoing education, yeah, definitely.
Kim, as you hear Lisa talk and you think about the issues that are coming up in Georgia, that you're going to have to face as a ballot initiatives that are there, what are the commonalities? What are the differences? Are there ways that different regions of this country are in the same boat, or are we approaching things differently?
No, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the things that have been named are very familiar to us here in Georgia, although we in the South will often say, we're not California, so there are things that we're just not going to do. But what we see, though, is, in fact, we do those things. We just do them. We can't do those to the legislator. So issues around bail reform, we've been working very hard on those issues on a city level, right? So if you look at the city of Atlanta, they've eliminated cash bail, and counties are going to be following pursuit the same way. So we can't get those things passed in the legislature right now in its current form. The other thing a commonality that I find very interesting is that, when the votes are all counted here in Georgia, it's clear that Joe Biden will have been the chosen president for Georgia. But when you look down the ballot, and this is why we have a runoff, right? Those same progressive votes did not go the rest of the way down the ballot. And so I was actually surprised to see that similarity with California as well. So for us in Georgia, I mean, we have a lot of work to do around educating folks, particularly around voting down ballot. there's some significant drop off from who voted for President Biden and then who voted in the US Senate elections. I mean, so that's literally the second X on your screen is the US Senate, and we had 100,000 people drop off at that level. And so that's some of the work that we're just going to have to do, is to talk more about what it means to vote down ballot, and then to really bring our partners and coalitions around to fight these issues in the ways that we can win, which is oftentimes on a city or county level. And then the last thing I'll say, I saw somebody raise the issue of climate justice. Yeah. And, interestingly, in Georgia, that has become a bipartisan issue. And that is largely because there are people who live in rural Georgia, which have been predominantly red areas, but their water is dirty. They have coal ash in their wells. And so they are going to their legislators and saying, we are dying of cancer. Please help us, right? And we have a nuclear power plant being built in the backyards of Southern Georgians who often vote and are represented by Republicans. And so these have become bipartisan issues. And you're seeing a lot of work between Democrats and Republicans in Georgia to try to address it. We don't use the word climate change. We use different language. But fundamentally, it's about making sure that all Georgians have clean water and that we have clean air to breathe. I mean, this has become a really, just in the last 5 years, a truly bipartisan issue that people are taking up. So I'm excited about that.
Well, and that brings up another point, which is that we, so sort of we as progressive people, we have a tendency to talk about issues using jargon that alienates people that we really need to bring on board. When like who isn't for clean water? And so we need to find better language. I mean, even in like when I think about racial justice, I think it's important to talk about white privilege, and I know I need to find other ways to talk about it just for that, because I know the reaction I get when I talk about that. And so I wonder, how much of this is just how do we learn how to communicate with each other? Are you finding that to be true?
Absolutely. And, we are working really hard to find the language that connects with people who we actually believe are ideologically in the same place, but we've just been using the wrong language, right? So an instance in that here in Georgia is we will have another runoff. There's the runoff that the whole nation is looking at, but we also have a state level runoff with the Public Service Commission. And in Georgia, the Public Service Commission is the commission that determines how much we pay for our utilities. That's from electricity and for gas. And for a very long time, Bubba, which is a good Georgia name, but Bubba has not been voting in the best interest of Georgians. And he's been a part of raising our rates. And so you're seeing poor people, particularly poor Black and brown people, struggling to keep their utilities on because Bubba and his friends keep voting against us. And so, we're starting to find the language to talk about like, hey, we need you to show up for this runoff and not vote for Bubba, because your actual rates, how much you pay for power, matters. And so it's not about how progressive or the fact that, clean energy is what Daniel is fighting about. Like, we're trying to come down to the bare basics, which is your gas bill is too high. And that's because of Bubba. Right. But it is hard. And because oftentimes our communities aren't, we're not connected to each other, right? Like, we're often in our own progressive bubbles with our own woke language. And then people are over here because we aren't talking to each other. We have struggled to find that common language. And that's really, I think, the work that we all need to do.
I'm going to jump to Alan in a second, but one more for you, Kim, which is you're right. The whole world is about to descend on Georgia for the next month and a half for these runoff elections. What can we do as All Saints Church to help? Is there a place to give to? Are there local grassroots organizations we can support? How do we help?
Absolutely. So you've heard the name Stacey Abrams. Well, that organization, or one of her organizations, is Fair Fight Georgia, or Fair Fight. Give to Fair Fight. You can certainly give to either of the Senate campaigns, to Reverend Warnock or to Ossoff, but Fair Fight is really, they've been doing the work and they've been doing it for years, and they have the strategy that I think will carry us long beyond January 5th, right? Fair Fight is carrying on the strategy that will help carry Georgia forward into new elections for 2022 too. So I encourage folks, give to Fair Fight, but also if you can come out here to Georgia for a month and a half or even for a week and knock on doors. We are here in Georgia, people don't really believe in masks. So it's okay to knock on a door. You should wear a mask. But
it's a little frightening, Kim, I gotta tell you.
It's okay to knock on doors here. So if you can come out and knock on doors and get people to show up and vote, for us, it's just a ground game of getting people to show up. And in Georgia, because we have, there again, there's more than one runoff happening. And so it's confusing to people.
Yep.
And so if we can just get people to go out and cast their ballot again, this time down ballot, right? Then we've got a real chance. So come on out.
So it's Fair Fight Georgia is the organization?
Yeah, it's Fair Fight, yeah.
Fair Fight. Well, I found my birthday Facebook fundraiser now, so that's great. Alan, want to jump to you. Clara Williams says the All Saints Church Vestry has adopted resolutions created, and part of it's creating a racial justice advisory board for here. Is there a racial justice component to what EPPN is doing in the Office of Government Relations that we can share and participate in? And also, just to let you know, we've got something here called a rapid response team. Every week we have an action that everyone takes together, and we regularly use the recommendations that come from the weekly emails for EPPN for that. So you're doing good work. So is there a racial justice component?
Awesome. Thank you for that comment and the question. I think it follows up nicely after what part of what Kim said, namely around the language that we use. And so we look at racial justice and healing work almost as a lens for all of the other issues rather than as something that stands alone on its own. Because more often than not, there's going to be a racial justice element of nearly any issue that we work on. And so we try to keep that in mind as we're addressing the environment or as we're addressing immigration or anti-poverty. And so that sort of plays out in different ways as we recognize, we work in coalition with other organizations to be more effective. And sometimes those organizations don't use the same language that we do. So does that mean making adjustments, in how explicitly we state something as racial reconciliation or not? But yet we can still advocate for positions and something that's deeper in meaning behind that can play into racial justice. And then we know that, people who are in decision-making positions aren't always in agreement with us. And so in thinking about the what and the how, right, we can still hold on to our values and the racial justice we want to pursue, but we've got to figure out how to communicate that and how to actually affect change. And so that just, it requires that type of linguistic gymnastics sometimes. Final comment to that, I think in using it as a lens, it also opens up more issues than just sort of the standard, go-to racial issues. I think we watched, I don't remember which debate it was. It wasn't the vice presidential one. We're talking about racial justice and suddenly the conversation is on criminal justice reform. That's a necessary topic, but it's not the only thing that people of color or the people who care about racial justice care about and need to care about. And so using that lens, we can identify things even like in our the COVID economic relief work that we've been doing. We've been advocating for funding for state and local governments from the federal level. And part of the racial justice implication for that is that state and local governments disproportionately employ non-white people. And so as those budgets are getting strained in responding to the COVID-19 crisis and the economic downturn, that's putting more jobs at risk that would then impact those communities or those populations. So that's just one kind of obscure example, right? That's not one of the standard, what is a racial justice issue? They all are in effect.
Right.
So that's our approach.
Yeah. So there's not sort of a package of things, because it's recognizing that and it's really what we've talked about, which is racial justice touches everything.
It does.
And in fact, it's I'm looking here in the chat. Jennifer Cano said something. She said it was a rhetorical question, but she said, "Will we ever be able to make it about economic and social capital privilege?" And that's a huge issue. And that's, racial justice issues touch economic justice issues. And one of the things that's interesting is how the word socialism has been used and continues to be used to just try to scare people, when first of all, socialism is a part of our life every day. But really it is, what does it mean to be compassionate and see people as more than just producers of goods and services, see people as beloved images of God. And so, and it's also a reminder that, the EPPN, it's one of the wonderful things about you serve in the whole church. All Saints Church, we occupy a specific niche in the Episcopal Church. But and you're serving the whole church. And so, it is sort of that way of how do we bring all of us together? Lisa, I have a question that's directed to you, which is something I hadn't heard about. Jim White says, it appears that the president of the California NAACP owns a political consulting firm that received, quote, 1.2 million and counting, unquote, from the campaigns working for or against at least 4 of the propositions. Can you speak to what appears to me to be a major conflict of interest?
Yeah, that's been written about in news articles. She does have a political consulting firm, and she did receive significant fees from the campaign she was involved in. And I don't know the internal workings of the NAACP, but I would imagine that there's going to be much discussion about that within their organization.
And that raises a larger issue, which is, particularly since Citizens United, but really before then, the role of money in politics and how it shuts out so many people is, it has become, my view, for some people, a deal breaker to even get into politics. I mean, that's one of the reasons I saw, like Kim, like the money, I can't even imagine the money you had to raise to even run for state Senate. But it also, it allows people who have a huge amount of money to basically create their own facts and broadcast them over and over and over and over again. And so, that seems to be the issue, campaign finance reform, that touches all the other issues, and yet it's the issue that I hear nothing about. And I'll throw that out to any of you. What do we do about that?
Well, I don't know what we can do about it because it's free speech. When we did campaign reform in California, we limited the amount that people could give to candidates. And what that created was this huge independent expenditure market. And in a way, it did the opposite of what it was intended to do. And I have been in 3 races this cycle that were and a little very discouraging to me. I had 3 great women candidates who worked really hard, who won the major endorsements, who were eminently qualified, who raised more than their opponents. And in the 11th hour, meaning in the final 3 to 4 weeks of the campaign, it was, in all instances, was big oil came in and spent, one case, I'm in an assembly race, $2 million in 3 weeks. I mean, my candidate raised $400,000, which we thought was great. And we were coming along and we had a real organization, and they just come in the final 3 weeks and rain $2 million on your head. And that's one of the races that hasn't been decided. It's still going back and forth, but it's discouraging. And it's a game you have to play now when you're a legislative candidate in California. You literally have to go to Sacramento and meet with all the interests in the hopes of A, trying to keep people out of your race, or B, trying to get someone interested in helping you, because those campaigns end up being double or triple the size of your own campaign. And, that is not healthy for democracy, in my opinion.
Kim, I'm just curious, what's sort of the conventional wisdom? How much money do you have to raise to be a state senator in Georgia? What's your treasurer telling you? Whoop, you're muted or something.
It depends on if you're trying to flip a seat or not. But
okay.
That does make a huge difference. I will say you cannot run. I mean, in Georgia, California money is like a lot more than ours. Here in Georgia, you can't win a race without raising $175,000, which in Georgia is a whole lot of money. But we also had races where $1 million was spent. And people ask the question, how do you spend $1 million in a town that has 10,000 people? We don't know, but money has been spent in that great quality. You know, I mean, here's the issue. If we want to have greater representation in our legislators, if we want to have brown and black folks, if we want to have socioeconomic diversity in our legislature, then we have to change how we do campaign financing. And it's right. It's not just about limitations to how much you can give to a candidate itself. It is an issue of independent expenditures. And here in Georgia and in places across the South, it's also an issue of what the salary is for a legislator once they get into office. You know, for Georgia, it's considered a part-time job and you get paid a very part-time salary. You know, somebody did the math and you get paid less than minimum wage to do this work. And so it makes, if, you know, we want a democracy, right? Like this is our goal. And so we want our legislators, I want my General Assembly to look like Georgia. But when they're only paying you $15,000 a year, and if you have to raise $150,000, then that alone eliminates a massive amount of people who could ever run for office. And so we've got to adjust that. And I just want to be clear, like there is no virtue in asking people who are already poor to essentially slave for on behalf of other citizens. Like it's just not fair. And so we've got to, at least in Georgia, I know you all in California, the General Assembly gets paid, I think, relatively well, but here in Georgia and across the South, until we start paying our legislators, it's just, our legislature is never going to reflect what the state looks like. It's not going to happen because a person who's working minimum wage cannot afford to step up and be a public servant in Georgia. It's just not possible.
So now you're vicar of the Church of the Common Ground. It's a church without walls for people living on the streets of Atlanta. Is that something that you're going to be able to continue when you're in the Senate?
That's right. I'm really actually very excited about that work. So where we serve Monday through Friday is literally across the street from the Capitol. And so I ran a campaign talking about the fact that legislators literally step over people who are experiencing homelessness on their way into their offices. And so I'm looking forward to doing the work of advocating on behalf of them and doing ministry with and alongside them when I'm not doing my other part-time job, right? So I will continue to serve both.
So this is something I find, first of all, entirely predictable coming from you, but also just incredibly exciting, which is, you know, you're talking about not just having constituents, these are the people that you pastor. And I wonder if there's a possibility, and you'll have to figure this out when you get there, of you know, as you make friends and colleagues in the state Senate, of just engaging them and meeting people. So maybe maybe it can become a legislature that doesn't just step over people on the way to work, but engages people and brings their hearts onto the Senate floor.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's my hope. And some of the work that I did as soon as I started working and serving in ministry at Common Ground was just getting my parishioners to walk inside of the building. They're Georgia citizens too. And so that Capitol that they're sleeping outside of is their Capitol too. And so those who had IDs, we had a day at the Capitol and I brought them inside because I want them very much to understand that that's a place where people should be advocating for them, but also where they can go and advocate for themselves, right? And so I do look forward to building that mutual relationship where legislators, where senators get to know the people that they've been stepping over, and that the people who've been stepped over get to know that they can have a conversation and really talk about the things that matter with those people who have power to make this, to change their lives.
Amen. Well, one of the things that we're seeing here since COVID, and I'm assuming it's the same everywhere, is a spike both in people who are experiencing homelessness, who have become homeless during COVID, but also what we found here in Pasadena is because of COVID restrictions, the shelters can only operate at about 25% capacity, and day centers and places like that, libraries where people would normally gather during the day, this was especially a problem in the summer, are closed, and so people had nowhere to go. And we've started we have a community of members of our congregation who are unhoused called Safe Haven on our campus. What I am concerned with, and I've heard other people be concerned with, is 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now, when some of the eviction moratoriums wear off, when some of the aid is gone, we are going to have a huge local, statewide, national spike in people experiencing homelessness. And I don't hear it being talked about. I don't see any legislation or money going to organizations like Here Union Station in St. Louis, in Pasadena. What can we do? And I'll ask this to all of you on the, on sort of the local, state, national level. What can we do? First of all, am I right? Is this coming down the road? And secondly, what can we do to get ready?
I'll just go ahead and say now, you are right if we don't do something. It is not inevitable. We do not have to have the end result that 18 months from now, there's a huge spike across the nation in homelessness. There are options, and we can fight and advocate for that now so we have rent moratoriums, but here in Georgia, basically when the moratorium lifts, your bill is due then, like immediately. So the 6 months of rent that you haven't been paid, you got to pay it right then. And I'm just like, well, if you can't pay it now, then how the hell are you going to pay it all in one lump sum 6 months from now? We've got to have rent forgiveness, mortgage forgiveness. Like that is key. We have to have some major legislation that gets passed in order to save people from the streets. It's not inevitable if we act now. And I think that happens on a city level, that happens on a county level, and it definitely has to happen on a state and federal level. There are people, people in the homelessness community, those of us who serve, we are talking about those issues for sure. We've started advocating and writing some proposed legislation, but it will take a huge coalition because it's a big lift. And we're talking about a lot of money to basically essentially bail regular citizens out.
Right.
Of having to experience homelessness. But it is possible for us to avoid this.
Lisa, I want to kick that over to you. Is there anything like that in the works that you're aware of in California to address this?
There's nothing specific that I'm aware of, but I am, I know it's being discussed. I know the governor's obviously been doing a lot of work in the area, the legislature, obviously local governments. I think it's, the answer is tough, as Kim said, because it's expensive. And I think that we are definitely going to need to have federal participation financially in order for programs like rent forgiveness to succeed. But it is a new day, so maybe that's possible now.
Another thing I want to jump to is you're working now with Planned Parenthood affiliates in Sacramento. And we are huge supporters here of Planned Parenthood of Pasadena and San Gabriel Valley. And so what are the main issues? And we can get Julianne Hines on here to talk about this too.
No kidding.
What are the main issues? There is a more progressive person in the White House, and yet the Supreme Court is now stacked with quite conservative justices. What's the strategy that y'all are working on up in Sacramento?
Let's listen to this. It's the end of the forum.
I was going to say that, in California, obviously, getting the funding we need out of the state budget always remains a priority. And because I believe the budget's we're going to have budgetary troubles going forward, I'm sure. It's just important to make sure Planned Parenthood here in California can continue to operate at the level we've been operating. That said, compared to other states and what the potential is for other states to act, we're in good shape in California. So I think the role of Planned Parenthood, the 7 affiliates across California, is to work with the national organization and figure out, given the fact that we're in pretty good shape here, what can we do to help other states? And it's being discussed and worked on as we speak.
MJ says, and this goes back to actually what you said, and I love the way you phrased it, is what we're talking about is a bailout for regular people. And MJ says it's expensive, but wasn't bailing out the banks expensive? And we did that. And so, I actually never have heard that language used of, this is a bailout for the most vulnerable people. Is there a chance, and maybe this is for you too, Alan, is there a chance for getting that federal assistance that Lisa says we're going to have if this is going to happen? Anybody?
Yeah, I think there is a chance. To what extent, it can be, to what extent it will go, I think is in question. And part of that is, financial. Do we continue to add to the debt in the country, or can we afford not to in this case, economically? And so I think overall, to me, the important pieces are to have these conversations we're having now talking about issues that are coming down the line so that we avoid urgent problems, when they arrive. And that's something that happened repeatedly over the past 4 years from both sides, not paying attention to these types of issues. And so I'm hopeful. I think, will anything pass? I'm not sure, but I'm hopeful that there may be a better chance for conversation among both main political parties in addressing some of these challenges. And I mean, we have seen the U.S. government do that in times of crisis. And I don't know that we have necessarily had that opportunity yet during this pandemic, even though we're, however many months in, 8 months in. And so I'm hoping that opportunity may be awaiting us in the new Congress.
Great. Kim, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always hopeful. That is just my nature. I'd rather be surprised and disappointed that people didn't live up to my expectations than to lower my expectations. So I am hopeful. We've heard talk about student loan forgiveness, and I think that that's probably more likely to happen now. And so yeah, I do believe it's possible. We also we know factually, we have the numbers that it is much more expensive to get someone out of homelessness than to prevent them from going into it in the first place. We know that. And last night I heard a vice president and elect say that we were going to trust science. And there's science, there's data, there's math here to indicate that we will save, ultimately, the federal government will save more money by bailing us out than by waiting for us to be in a place where we're unhoused, unsheltered, and then fully dependent on the government for all assistance and on charities, right? So I think it's not only is it the kind thing to do, the compassionate thing to do, but I think it's also the fiscally responsible thing to do at the end of the day. So yes, I am hopeful. Obviously, I think that, but it will require the will of the people, and it will require us as regular citizens to stand up and to really demand it, and to say that this is where we want our tax dollars to go. Like, we care about this issue, and this is where we want to spend our tax dollars.
So Mary Bush asks, for Kim or anyone, what do we say to those opposed to rent or mortgage forgiveness who say nobody's helping me pay my rent? Why should I pay for somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's because it's the right thing to do. Right. But also, I'm clear, I don't have any children, and I help support public schools. I do that. I pay my taxes and contribute to the public school education, because I believe that children should have an opportunity to receive a quality education. And even if I were given the option to opt out, I would continue to pay, because it matters. And I think at the end of the day, we often think that we do a lot of stuff ourselves, right? Like, nobody's helping me pay my mortgage. Well, when I call 911, and my house is on fire, somebody does come and put my house out, for me, right? That's a public service that we share with one another as a fire department. And so, so much of this is none of us are doing this stuff on our own. And so I think we need to acknowledge that and go ahead and help people who really, really need it. Again, we're either going to pay now or we're going to pay later, but there will be a price to pay.
Amen. Clara Williams reminds us that this summer's All Saints Church Racial Justice Ministries book group read is Stacey Abrams' recent book, Our Time Is Now, which explains the voter suppression monster in southern states and the work of Fair Fight and Fair Count. So make sure you check that out and join the Racial Justice Ministries reading of that. I mean, they did it this past summer, but you can still check that out and do that. Got a couple minutes left. Would just love to give each of you just maybe 30 seconds to what's a final word that you would have for the All Saints Church congregation as we look at what's next for us after this election. Lisa, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, keep voting. It's really important for everyone to vote. I think more people voted in California this time than ever have, so that's a good time. And to continue the fight, I mean, it's to what Kim said. We have to remain optimistic, and we have to keep pushing forward. Continued change is possible, and we're in a very tough environment, obviously, with COVID being far from over. In my opinion, there's just still going to be a lot of problems associated with that, and we just have to reach out and work together and continue, making our state and nation stronger and better.
Amen. Thank you so much. Alan.
Yeah, so, I hope that folks will pay attention. I think a little more, just be more attentive to what's going on. And I mean, Kim, the way you explained this issue of rent and potential homelessness, increase in homelessness, like the time for decision making isn't always when something is in the news and when we may be able to gain some street credit from being seen, saying, or supporting something. And so we've got to be engaged when decisions have to be made. And the Episcopal Church, I mean, from any number of levels, from the parish level to the Office of Government Relations where I work, is here as a resource and can help guide people's actions in this. So people don't necessarily need to feel intimidated and scared to get involved in that way. They can reach out and join in this work, whether that's at All Saints or at the federal level with the EPPN.
Thank you. And then Kim, why don't you take us home?
Yeah, so I decided to run for the Georgia General Assembly because I watched 90% of the bills that get passed in Georgia be passed unanimously across political lines and divides. And that inspired me because that meant that I would be entering into a body of people who were willing to work together and to find some places of commonality. And so I think that's my encouragement to All Saints and to all of us is to still be willing to work across the aisle. There are some I'm going to speak as a Black person right now. I always speak as a Black person, but I'm going to say this very clearly.
Yeah.
There are some very good reasons why there are people who believe that those who voted for Donald Trump are racist. There's some very good reasons why people might believe that. And I'm saying today that we need to move past that and get to know people and find the ways that we can work together. Because if we want to end homelessness, if we want to stop our climate from burning up, it's going to require all of us. It's going to require the 70 million people who voted differently than I did. And so I believe, again, I am optimistic, but I think it's the hope that I find in God. I believe that we can do this work if we do it together and if we work across lines that have historically divided us. And so that's my encouragement. Go find somebody who had some different thoughts than you did and find ways for us to move forward together.
Amen. Kim, thank you so much. Kim Jackson, Alan Yarborough, Lisa Gasperoni, thank you for joining us. As I knew the hour would go by fast, and it did.